How's that, Captain Nemo? Very cool. So, hey, thanks very much. Anyone just get so excited about coming back on board after missing a day last week. It's just good to be back on board. But as I stated, I just go through a whole lot of things in terms of changing technique or media or method and so on. I'm a real big fan of a typical bond paper or marker studies and pencil, Prismacolor pencil, pastel, etc. Tone papers, watercolor paper, etc. It's just a variety of things to deal with. But after last week, I sat back and I thought, it'd be kind of nice to go back into a system where we really go back and look at some basic things from a watercolor exercise that we transfer into other areas of medium. And I'll tell you, I'm a huge fan and proponent of watercolor. I don't do enough of it, and shame on me. But I really, I do a lot of things mechanically with it sometimes. I'll do product design work, architecture, interior space, variety of things. But I also really turn around the corner sometimes and just go into fine art studies. And what I would like to show you today is just a series of things I've been working on for the last day or two. Just on some really quick little fast vignettes on watercolor. Let me begin the premise by stating this. I think one of the great things about watercolor is it is so fluid and it is so pervasive in terms of approach and technique. Because when you lay certain things down, it looks alarming and, oh my goodness, it's too dark, it's going to be overthreading. But as it dries in, and if you use the right papers, for example, and the ones I'll show you today, I'm working on Arches 140 pound, but I'm switching over to Laquarelle 300 pound, a little smoother, a little less texture to it. I think it'll be a lot of fun to work with here. But today's studies, I just want to work with, these are real fast little 5x7 studies based on just technique and approach. We're using some very limited palette work to deal with here, but no matter what I do on stream, during my performances here on Twitch, I always take the time to go do a little bit of battle planning and put together a lesson plan here. Not a lesson plan so much, but an approach. So you'll see here on the screen, you'll see a series of real quick little pencil sketches. And these are kind of I do this for a lot of different areas. For example, car design, product work, and that. You just go through a series of exploratory sketches to kind of composition down the right character, the right scale, and all those matters we're dealing with here. So all that to say that I've gone through, I'm going to show you 5 studies I just worked on the last couple of days. And in all sincerity, each one of these watercolors you will eventually see, I gave myself about an hour's time, because if you go beyond an hour sometimes on small size, I have to go back in and fuss over it and just start to make changes, and all of a sudden you begin to ruin it. It gets muddier, which is an interesting premise too. I think one of the great things about watercolor is that when I'm still learning how to work with is that mastering the transparency, where you lay down one thing, let it dry, and not go back in and muddy it up and just wait for it. Be very patient. It's a very patient process. Even though it's lightning quick, it takes a lot of patience. And really, what I've noticed in doing these 5 studies here today, really requires us to think ahead. What's coming up next? What are 3 steps or 4 steps down the road? So much more, so much of a cerebral process to it. Not that car design or all the other materials I work with is not. This is a different set of circumstances. It's much more spontaneous. Never really finished. You need to just stop. Yeah, you got it, Nemo. That's exactly right. It never really is finished, and you could go back in and fuss. But I'm really excited about the fact that I got back into watercolor after all the absence of maybe about 5 or 6 months. I got back in, and it's just a fascinating technique to me, and I'm going to do more of it in the new year with some stream work here, and spend more time maybe doing some automotive stuff and some more landscape work, and just kind of perfect the technique. And hopefully if it's a help to you, that'd be marvelous. So let's get started here. Every instance I work with, for example, these 5 studies started like this. I started with a little series of little pencil sketches, not quite the same proportion as the 5x7, but just to get the composition down. Where's the location? This is an interesting format here, not the sketch, but the location. This is the lighthouse at Norfolk Bay in Norfolk, England, one of the oldest lighthouses in the UK, and it sits on the shore. It's a very old system, very nice domed glass canopy on it with a fence guard around it, very, very stable looking, but it's a unique circumstance and a great setting. So this is a little pencil study based on getting the composition down on that guy, just to see what it might look like. And I always go through that. I do about 2 or 3 of these guys, but this one I really liked in terms of the right view, the walkway into it, the beach on this side, the water line over here, lighthouse and the residence, and some of the foliage in front of it, which is really tough to do. You get really muddy in a hurry. Man, I tell you, that's a real task. So that's an interesting thing. So that was the first one I'm going to show you here. Then I jumped down to I don't know if you've ever been or visited Vlissingen in the Netherlands. Very interesting place. It's a series of canals, and it's just very close to Amsterdam. But it has a neat set of circumstances where these canals go through, meander through the countryside. In Vlissingen, it's a fishing village, but it also has a series of canals on which windmills are set and some small farm areas for obvious produce growth and so forth. There might be tulip farms, I'm not sure. But when I was at Adam Opel design staff, we traveled through Vlissingen and stayed there for about 3 days. It was just fascinating, right in the ocean. Beautiful, beautiful scenery. Tulip fields, just magnificent color all over the place. And then again, going down through the canals and seeing these windmills, it just brought back a memory. So I'm going to do one of those guys too. So that was, again, a little pencil sketch about where the canal would be, where the farmland is, the little shed area, the actual cupola up on top, landscape behind it, and I'll show you that one in a moment here. I'm just setting the stage here to show you what takes place, to go through a series of things in terms of putting together some final comp art for these watercolors. Third one I did, went back to Dover, England, and the White Cliffs of Dover. And I'll never forget traveling back from Opel with my family, coming back from Opel design staff in Europe when I stayed there at design staff for that period of time. On the way back out of Frankfurt Airport, it was really interesting how we flew over the White Cliffs of Dover. I looked back, and it was an absolutely stunningly bright, sunny day from the aircraft and the window seat. And those cliffs were just absolutely stunningly glowing white. It was just really cool. So I thought, well, I'll do a little bit of a Dover piece here and to see what that might look like. So again, another composition, just catching the landscapes as it falls down on these cliff areas here. And then with the tide out, all the little beach areas and the leftover remnants of when the tide goes out, what it might look like when that takes place. Third one I did was interesting. Probably the fourth one was interesting. This is Saint-Michel in France. It's a very old fortress, really beautiful surface. Sits on in the ocean in the bay there, but it's close to Normandy and has a real presence about it. So I chose that one because of the different approach in the structures. It's very antiquated, very old school approach, architecture. Really cool stuff to work with. So there's the final comp on that again. The setting of the actual structure itself, then the bay coming in, and then the close-up portion of the beach and the sand areas, and some of the remnants at the end of that. So here we are here. The last one I did was this last one, pretty famous here, the Tower Bridges of London, right on the Thames River. Again, same composition with the warehouses off the one side, the towers themselves, some of the fishing boats, and the tugs kind of pulling through the harbor, etc. And so those are the 5 studies that I really spent some time on. I think it's really critical to say at this stage of the game. I've never been one. There are times I'll do a watercolor, for example, or even an automotive sketch or a concept sketch, especially in this genre, and not do a sketch at all, because sometimes a sketch will inhibit what you want to do in terms of approach and technique. And again, the accidents that take place in a watercolor could be a very, very safe place to work with and to work into, because again, if you have to sketch it down in black and white, it might dictate certain things, or you have to be very cautious about where you are. So there are times I'll use a sketch like this or go through a series of those studies, but other times I'll go right back in and just kind of lay down the watercolor and just let the empathy kind of come together, see what we come up with. So there we are, and I'll go back to these in a moment. Now let's take the first one again, the lighthouse at the Norfolk Harbor. Just interesting. That's the thumbnail study. Now here's the actual final watercolor. As I said earlier, this is put side by side here. This one was done from start to finish. I laid down the wash, laid in some of the very limited palette, for example. I gave myself, in every watercolor here that you're going to see today, I gave myself no more than 45 to 60 minutes. 45 minutes, 3/4 of an hour to an hour. So it's to not go back in and modify the thing up and make a mess out of it. But again, a very limited palette. I was there in crimson, some cobalt blue, and again, sepia tones, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and some very deep mixtures of cobalt blue, for example, and yellow ochre to get some of the greens and so forth in place. And just very simple, and the walkway, and it was, again, if I were to do this again, I think I'd leave that walkway a little bit lighter in terms of getting kind of a sneak into it. But again, it's a very interesting structure, because this dome piece is very, very classic in terms of one of a kind and all throughout Europe. So again, the sketch helped me kind of put together the dictation of the actual thumbnail. And I'm not a colorist. I'm not an analyst in terms of what I could be. And I'd love to be able to sit back and take the time to go through an experimental and put together a palette of colors that I think really work well. So I'm not really a theoretical or a technical colorist. I'm very limited in palette and so forth, and I do that for a reason, to keep myself out of trouble, quite frankly. But it's simple things like cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, some sand colors, for example, sepias, blues, and crimsons, some Naples yellows, about maybe 6 or 8 at the most I deal with, and I stay away from black as best I can. There's some, and this is all Payne's gray, for example, all the dark areas you see in there. Payne's gray is a little bit almost really, it's that. Thank you, Nemo. That's a lot of fun. But again, I think that the two things that I really work hard on and try to learn through and improve upon is, number one, the sketch quality, and number two, the transparency. I'm still not there yet. I have a lot to learn in terms of getting those washes down, and I watch some individuals, for example, put this stuff together, and it just fascinates me. So I think that's one of the things, and let me say this while I'm at it too. I think one of the things that's fascinating about the whole process in watercolor is, and why it's really critical for me to understand it, is I'll take some of the things I've learned from the accidents I make here and bring it right back into transportation. As I'm working with a marker, I'll be much more spontaneous. I'm much more spontaneous with marker pastel, typical automobile design work, than I am with watercolor. I'm not cautious about it, but I'm conscious about the fact that I need to make the right decision at the right time. So again, keys, good sketch, whether you put it down in pencil or just go spontaneously. Number two, a very limited palette. Number three, don't overwork it. Just keep it nice. This sky came in about, this, as I said, this sky came in about maybe 30 seconds at best. Just walk it in there. This is wet on wet, laying down some color, then go back in and just kind of fussing through getting some of the architectural down. So there was a first sketch that was done from the Norfolk lighthouse in Norfolk Bay in England. Second one was the one in Vlissingen, which is very interesting. So here's a second guy coming back into the canals here. Let's kind of put this aside like that. You can see it or not. I'll move this over just a bit so we can see it. How's that? Nemo, better? Pretty good. Hey, by the way, I really appreciate you taking the time, Nemo. I'm so sorry for, let me just inject this thought while I'm at it here. I'm very apologetic to you in terms of not being able to respond. You sent a note out to Michael sometime to Shadow about you might be ending your Twitch program at the end of this year. Believe me, I'm going to miss you. You're a tremendous inspiration. A lot of respect for your talent and what you're endeavoring to do. And I just want to stay in touch with you over the course of time. That's why I put that note back out of my chat service. We need to chat, if not today after the stream, but I'll try to get with you on Discord and go through some things. So I want to thank you very much for your loyalty. You've been an absolute inspiration, and I'm going to miss you. Believe me, I really am going to miss you. So back to the task at hand. Again, here's a little pencil sketch. It kind of puts the canal up front, some of the landscape, some of the furtive farmland in front of it, the actual shed itself, then the actual windmill. And again, a little bit of foliage behind it, just kind of give it some atmosphere, some depth, and interesting things. Sure, we should keep. Yeah, we will stay in touch. Believe me, you're an incredible inspiration to me, and I can't thank you enough for your loyalty. I miss seeing you when you're not on the stream, but when you're on the stream, believe me, mark this down. You've made my day, Nemo. Terrific. So here we go. A different approach. Again, same limited palette, cobalt blue and some yellow ochre. Just kind of let the water kind of work through it and so forth, and let it just kind of do its thing. Once it dries, come back in and create. I always like to work deep space first, get the skies down, then come full forward and get some of this started. Just kind of ink in, wash in some of the structures, and take it nice and easy. Lay in some of the. Again, this black is not, as I said earlier, it's not a true black. It's more of a Payne's gray. You can take it down. It's a little bit, has a bit of an Ingo tint to it, but you can take Payne's gray and neutral tint and create a nice simple black to kind of give it some character to it. But again, notice very ethereal, very lucid in the background to give a little bit of depth and scale. Give it a sense of depth. A lot of detail back in the not a lot of detail on some of the windmill paddles, but that's not the base of the composition. I just want to get each one of these watercolor studies, to me, represent a study and learning certain things about certain aspects of the creative process that I really need to tone in on. So these taught me a lot of good lessons about how to keep things hopefully clean, not to muddy it up. And I'm still, as I said earlier, still kind of fighting that a little bit, because it's I'm one of those guys that we lay down a color, ooh, that's not quite the right tone, go back in and touch it there. Not a good sign for me in many cases. Over the last few weeks, and especially the later sketches you'll see here, I've really gone into, all right, let's pull back a little bit here and just let it do its natural thing. And the more I read about good watercolorists, that's what they do. They lay it all down, they let it dry, they let it kind of blend in and meld. And a lot of it too, I think, is the right paper choice. As I said, I'm working on Arches 140 pounds, a little bit on the rough side. For a purpose, and I thought I'd give that a try. But Watercolor makes a paper that's a little smoother and it holds the water better, and it's just as transparent as can be. So I'm going to switch gears in the new year. I've got a whole pad of Watercolor 300 pound coming in to work with. It's a little bit softer, so we'll see what that does as far as technique goes. I'm always a bit scared by watercolors. Water and paper are not quite friends. See, yeah, that's really well said. They're not friendly at all, Nemo. You're absolutely right. But I think your premise is well taken. How do you avoid the paper losing its structure? What I do with that, Nemo, is I really take I take the paper itself and I really secure it on the board. I put a tape border around it, just a little bit of an overlap on the sketch itself, so it keeps it from bubbling or warping. And it's been much more effective, because if you don't do that, you're right, it'll just warp all over the place. So let me catch this question again. How do you avoid the paper losing its structure? And yeah, well, I think that's a good question. The pilling side of it is just using enough water to kind of get it all to work together. If you look real close at this guy, if I can bring it up a little bit closer, there's a lot of not so much pilling going together, but you have to work that very quickly. And most, as I said, your comment there is interesting, because that's why I spent no more than 45 minutes to an hour in each one of these sketches, to avoid that from, like cauliflowering or kind of spreading all over the place. If you let it sit there for a long period of time, man, it'll do that instantly. So really well said. And again, let's go back to your previous question too, but they're not a friendly force. However, I think that one of the great inputs I get from doing watercolor is the decision-making process. You've got sky, you've got composition, you've got, whether it's a barn or a windmill or a lighthouse or whatever the subject matter is, you've got a topic to work with there. So you make decisions about lights and darks, shadows, where to place the dark, where to place the light, where to draw back into it, where to let things go loose, where to come back in and be much more detailed. All those things to me are paramount, because they really teach discipline in terms of, okay, be aggressive here, be passive there. Very, very interesting set of circumstances. And I think that's what causes me to kind of pull back. I'm not cautious about watercolor. I'm just very much in the planning mode. I'm always thinking, oh, if I lay the ochre down, what's coming about 3 steps away, maybe some little more tint in the sky tone, and maybe some cobalt or ultramarine, or maybe a lavender of some sort to kind of give a little more character to the sky. So you're shifting all the time. And I think that's, to me, the great intrigue of working with watercolor. So hope to answer your question there, Nemo. Does that help? I avoid the losing its structure and the pilling process by being very quick, making decisions. And well, that's not easy to do, because sometimes, honestly speaking, the decisions I make don't turn out quite right all the time, but I work with it. So there's the third one, second part of it we've done. That was, again, the windmills on the canals at Vlissingen in the Netherlands. Beautiful part of the world, just absolutely terrific. Yeah, it's a bit less intuitive. Yeah, it's very strategic. That's a good word, Nemo. It's very strategic. For example, when I did these thumbnail sketches, going back to the pencil pieces for a moment here, when I did these guys, the first thing I thought of was, all right, how am I going to plan the sky? What's going to happen with the shadows on the lighthouse? Where's my light source coming from? How am I going to play the foreground against the background? How much ocean do I need to see? Every one of these compositions had a whole lot of thought behind it. And I'm not saying that's special, but we're just planning it through. But the strategy was all that to say that when I went to watercolor, I had a method to deal with, and the strategy was already set, which again, and I hope I'm not being redundant here, but when I go through these processing things like this, especially in watercolor, when I start to mix the color up and get the palette out and go to it, I'm already thinking 5 or 6 steps down the road. This is going to go first. However, remember, step 5 is going to be really critical. Save room for that. Let's move on here. I don't want to bore you to death with a lot of conversation. To me, the third one was interesting. Again, the White Cliffs of Dover, always interesting. Let's go back, and there's the actual finished product right there. If we can see that, there's a sketch above. Let's see if we can sneak that in there. There's the actual little thumbnail sketch, and I noticed the sky was pretty aggressive when I did the thumbnail sketch. But I thought, you know what, there's so much drama in those cliffs. I think I'll kind of pull back on that and go to watercolor and be a little less definitive. This is, again, there's a little bit of lavender in the sky, lavender opaque, and again, cobalt blue, just a simple, this is wet on wet in the sky. Let that dry. Then I came right back in and just sap greens and some cerulean yellows to create some of the grass tones up on the hillside, up on top. But the tough one was getting all this material up front here. When the tide goes out, what does it look like? Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, that just that was about, in all sincerity, even to get those reflections in the water, that took about maybe 5 or 6 passes of that white Winsor Newton watercolor, because it just goes in and soaks, and it just kind of spreads out and it just fades, and you have to keep building it, keep building it. But again, notice the nice thing about that was the patience factor. The patience factor was, oh, neat. You lay it down and it just looks really bold, but it just kind of softens off and you kind of work with it. But the real challenge in this composition was, like in this case here, it's in a 30-second sketch. Yeah, this looks pretty good. A little bit of an inlet, a little bit more of the bay, a little bit more of the surface as the tide goes up. But this is what I was getting at in terms of being much more spontaneous. Notice there's a lot less fuss in here. I just laid down. This is not wet on wet. This is just dry. This is brush on actual dry paper. I just kind of let the thing bleed a little bit and then kept it really nice and simple and spontaneous. And it worked out, I think, fairly well. If I were to do it again, I think I'd recreate this a little bit, maybe a little more texture detailed, although I wouldn't want to really, hey, how you doing, Chip? Good to have you on board, Doctor. How's everything? Hope you guys had a good holiday. Going through some just simple watercolor studies here, Chip. Just kind of explaining what I've done in terms of sketches first and then transfer them into the actual watercolors. Let me just bring up the speed here, Chip. We started with this one. This was the first one we did. From that sketch up on top, it's a lighthouse at Norfolk. I'll just kind of bring up the speed here, Chip. So pardon me for interjecting a thought here, Nemo. This one was a result of this little thumbnail sketch produced that watercolor, and it's one. I'll just quickly I'll review them at the end of the stream. The second one was the actual very interesting series of the windmills in Vlissingen, Holland. This was the actual sketch. There's a little transfer of the watercolor itself, and it was what that looked like. Again, very simple palette. We just got finished discussing that guy. Now we're talking about the White Cliffs of Dover, which was this one up on top. Very sensitive, because I mean, if you overplay the shadows, it gets real muddy. So this is a good example for me to be really disciplined in terms of just laying a fabric, take some of the green, for example, some of the shadow you see in the cliffs came from just pulling a little bit of color from the greens up on top and putting it into the actual cliffs itself. Yeah, thank you very much, Chip. That's fun. And that's a good point too, Chip, about the depth factor, where you really have to think in terms of where the darks are going to fall, where the lights are going to fall. And again, this is a real bear. I mean, it's so ethereal in terms of what to put in, what to leave out. But I thought we accomplished the look here that was after as a result of going through the little thumbnail sketch. So it really looks graphic, organic. It shoves in fuzzy grass and different kinds of moss. Yeah, you talking about which one you're referring to? The one in Dover, the one I've got up now, Nemo. The foreground really looks organic, like yeah. That was a task at hand. I think you're referring to this one. That was a task at hand to not overwork it. Is really interesting how it all came together, because I had a really good plan to get the cliffs down and the bay put in place and some of the depth in the background. But this was a real labor of love, and I did labor at it. Let me correct my term there. I was very careful to make sure it was very spontaneous and not so much overworked. In other words, there's some sands in here. There's a little bit of sepia, Payne's gray, some sap green, and some lemon yellows. I mean, just very simple stuff to kind of create that atmosphere. So that was the third one with the White Cliffs of Dover. Let's move on here. The fourth one was a really challenging one. This is a really cool one. I thought this guy was very unique. It's a great landmark off the coast of France near Normandy, and it's in the Saint-Michel or Mount St. Michael's. Really interesting. Again, such an old fortress. It was an old monastery, but it had certain character about it. And I thought, this needs some active and animation. So this is the actual structure itself. Very, very old, very, very timeless structure piece. A lot more flamboyance in the sky. This was such a drab, kind of a low-key sandstone appearance to it. I thought it'd be nice to kind of animate the sky and then reflect that back into the actual water. And again, picking up the organic stuff near the shoreline here to give it a little bit of a present foreground. middle ground, background. So darks and lights and just balancing it off here. Again, notice how the pencil sketch kind of set up the mood. A little bit more active in the sky, location of the actual structure itself, going back in and really creating some of the sculpture around the actual surface itself, and then come back in with the little reflective light back in the tide when the tide is out, or the water surface, and really being very, again, same process here. I utilized, pardon me for reaching in, I use the same approach here that I use here. Kept it more organic and didn't want to fuss over it too much. So, and I was very pleased with the fact that this one was a tough challenge, because again, you've got so much interest in this guy. You didn't want the foreground to fight with the middle ground, so that was part of the process as well. I don't know if you guys agree or not, but very interesting set of circumstances to put together here. And as I said, Chip, thank you for joining here. The reason for doing this today in the stream is to kind of shift gears a little bit and get into the rhythm of not falling in love with the same product and the same process over and over again. I think one of the things I'm going to look at in the new year here is I'm putting together a pretty good calendar for next year about changing pace from pencil to watercolor to maybe some Liquitex stuff, and just different things to work with. And this has always been a fascinating discipline to me, because I'm not afraid of it. I'm not intimidated by it. I'm just intrigued by it. And I want to get to the place where I can really get the transparencies down and be very quick and fluid in it. So maybe next year when I open up the books in January, I'm going to start doing some more live watercolor stuff. So it might take a little more time, but I really want to show you what I've learned, hopefully, over the course of the next few weeks in working with this. And I don't know if you caught or not, Chip, but each one of these studies you're looking at here, the sketches were maybe about 30 seconds worth of time, just laying down a composition to get an idea of where I wanted to go. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, when I actually put the watercolors together, I gave myself 45 minutes to an hour most. And that's what you're seeing here, just a real quick strikes. And as I said to Captain Nemo, I'll repeat it again, the reason I went quickly was to not overwork the stuff. Although the colors are not too different. No, they're not different at all. They're very subtle, but at the same time, I think work well as a composition in terms of keeping it all in harmony and getting the right impact where I needed to go with it, and being very lucid and very spontaneous up front. But again, I think the time factor, back to that, time factor to me is essential. The hour limit here really taught me some lessons about, oh yeah, this is good. You did that very well. You didn't do that very well. So there's always this check and balance about what worked and what didn't work. So I think that's the learning cycle for me. I'm always on the hunt for learning something neat and new. And I think while I'm on that subject matter too, next year I'll be bringing my Cintiq in the office. I'm going to start some more digital concept work. I'm not a big fan of that because my client base doesn't really like it, but I think I'm going to show some things in terms of being a little bit more digital stuff. I think I've gotten the lighting in this studio is not subjective for it yet, but I'm going to see if I can work out a lighting system where we can kind of cancel out the overhead lights, because every time I bring in to work with it, the light reflects on the surface, so you can't see what we're working on. So pardon me again for changing gears here, but that's part of the rationale about why I'm spending time here to put together a good plan of action for next year to really open up a lot more variety in terms of the stream process here. And again, if you guys know of anybody that wants to join me or follow me, boy, I really appreciate the act of the nosing in the rod, guys, because I really respect what you've done for me, Chip, Captain Nemo. Great respect for you, and I can't thank you enough for being loyalists over the course of time. It's been really great. So, and again, this is a little review time for me to kind of pull back on technique and show you the little things we've been involved in, and put together the process for today's stream. Worked on these sketches over the last day or two, just to get them all set and ready to go. And then hopefully next year we'll do a little bit more hands-on stuff. So there's the Mont Saint-Michel, Michael Saint-Mont in Normandy, France. Then the last one I worked with was obviously a no-brainer. It's a pretty interesting little guy here. It was this one here. Let me move this up so we can kind of see what this little thumbnail does. There's the thumbnail sketch. Oh, let's move it over here. Let's do this. There's a thumbnail sketch right there, and there is the Tower Bridges study. So again, the warehouses along the shoreline, fading back into the actual towers themselves, some of the boats in the foreground, and a real ghostly atmospheric approach in the background, again reflecting it right back in the water. And I think the thing I've really learned about this one, before I do this again, I take this whole foreground and maybe pick up more of this tone right in through here and let that just go more to paper. Yeah, you have to get the reflections into the water here, but I think I lost a little bit of character through here. I try to save it by getting more highlight into it. It works, but it's not, again, as fluid as I'd like to have been. Again, because of the fact that, again, as I said in the beginning of the program, really getting into some more transparencies and letting more of the paper kind of come through. It's almost like a very interesting analogy. I'm a big proponent, for example, during vehicle design. Very little, oh, this is neat. I love the mix of simple, complex. Yeah, I think that, thanks very much, Chip. But I do agree, don't you think, that just go a little bit lighter through here? I mean, it works as a composition. It still has an ethereal quality, but it's not as clean as I'd like it to be. And before I started, before you joined forces with us, Chip, that's what I was getting at. And I'm still learning how to become much more transparent. You know, laying down a wash and not going back in and fussing it and let it dry, which I have done in a lot of areas. And then going back in and trying to rework it. Sometimes you lose the presence of that spontaneity. But this is a good exercise in terms of picking up little details and so forth. And I think I'm going to go back, as I said, go back into this one again. Notice how nice and clean it looks in the sketch right through here. All this is all opened up. I think I'd go back in and let that open up and just catch enough of reflection here and let that go. A bit more definition in the boat at the dock area, and then this tug, a little more definition in the tugboat as well. It works, but again, things to work on, but it works so well. It's a bit in motion in the water, probably a slight breeze. Yeah, it is a bit of a windy day, a rainy and windy day in London. You're right. Thank you, Nemo. That's a good excuse. I'll use that one for future reference. Well, anyway, yeah, I think it's palatable, but I think I still want to go back in and read it. And I'm going to be clarified too for those of you who are watching, for example, do a lot of work day to day that have a lot of talent that you gentlemen have. I'm not saying, for example, that you need to strive for perfection. I think that's a real misnomer. The perfection to me, you lose a lot of the character in the class, or the intrigue of the drama of what's going to happen next, or how to make changes on the fly. I think the real challenge for me is to make sure that what I've learned here, the dexterity of going to watercolor, I bring it back into transportation design. What I learned in transportation design, I bring back into watercolor. And I think the one big transfer over the top of the other is really interesting to me is that when I do automobile work or product design work, I've always said this in my streams, I always let the paper kind of come through. I leave a lot of open space. Why? Because the marker provides the skeleton, and then the pastel and pencil and tempera begin to put the flesh on it. So I think that's a great relationship between vehicle design or product work or architectural work into watercolor. So what I'm learning to do now is to take that same theory or practical approach from my sketch rendering skills, if I have any, and transportation design and product design, where that open paper is always there for availability and adjustments, and bring that right into the discipline of watercolor, which is, I think, why I brought this process up here. So, and then once that's established, to go back in and learn some of the complexities here, for example, and being more spontaneous in some of these areas, bring that back into product design. So there's always this tremendous trade-off and an improvement factor when you go from one to the other. And I think, I'll say this, and I hope I'm not being disrespectful, I'm always concerned about people who fall in love with one technique or one approach. It's again, I'm not being critical. I'm just making an observation. People who fall in love with one approach and never really experience the joy of making mistakes and how to adjust in making those mistakes. And I think that's a teaching tool that is extremely important. I'm going to work with young people. First thing I tell them is, if you're perfect, there's a front door. If you make mistakes, welcome to my club. We're going to make those mistakes and adjust as you go. And I think that's one of the secrets of being fluid, being excited, and being almost tuned into your craft. And it opens up tremendous doors of opportunity, too. I think that's what's great about it. Of course, it's kind of Nemo. It's the imperfection that make watercolor speak to the viewer, whether intended or not. Yeah, I think it does tell a story. It really does. And again, I'm very much conscious of the fact that I have a different approach to it as opposed to you might have or Chip would have. That's great. I mean, that's what makes it all function. And I look at some of the stuff I see on the internet and I'm going, wait, and I hope I'm not being critical here. I've got to be honest with you. Some of the stuff I see on the internet is just not worthy of being on the internet. But some of the people I have really a lot of respect for, like Edward Seago, for example, Edward Wesson, Steve Hall, some of the great watercolorists, Jeff Kernsey, those guys are great technicians, but they have different approaches. And I think that's what I've been kind of following up on and working toward. So great stuff. And it just tells a story. You're right. It's a bit of a different mood, but it's kind of an overcast, windy, breezy day. Thank you very much, Captain Nemo, in London. And I think that works well. So there we are, gang. That goes back. Let me kind of review these guys. Go backwards with these beauties here. Pardon me to reach across. So let's go this. So right away, let's go back just for Chip's benefit. If you're still with us here, Chip, these are really fast 1-hour studies. That's the palette that I work with to start with. Just a nice series of sketches in terms of little thumbnail studies. Put them all together. Let's get them out of the way. That ends that beauty. And then down one by one, there's the watercolor of the lighthouse. There are the windmills. Kind of a nice. I mean, let's see if we can line these up. See what you think here, guys. Let's see. That's that and that. And then there's the White Cliffs of Dover. I don't know if that'll fit in there or not. Not really. So that one there, and maybe we'll get enough of that one in. I don't know. Let's see. Nope. Let's go two at a time. There's a pair. So your consensus. What do you think, guys? Is this passable? I mean, you've been part of the process for a long time here, guys. I just really appreciate your input here. Is it passable? Do we keep going with this stuff? Should I put some more streams on? Maybe do more watercolor work? I think that's why, again, that's another reason for doing this today. Kind of stop a little bit and take some inventory and get some feedback from good people out there that say, I'd like to see more livable watercolor. This is really interesting. So, what do you think, Chip? Is it passable? Can you give me about a B+ or so, hopefully? Hope that's the case. There we are. And I think I will start dedicating to whatever you're doing. It's working, so hey, thanks very much, Chip. I appreciate that. So they're the first two we did. Just going to put those off to one side. And here's the next pair we did. There's an interesting little set here where you got two different very dramatic systems. One very soft because of the drama in the actual, let's do that here. Let's get those up. Because of the drama involved in the actual cliffs themselves. It's so peaceful, beautifully serene. And then the drama of this old fortress in Normandy. Sorry, just got attention as a meeting. I can't. Hey, no problem. No problem at all. Thanks, Chip. It's great. Pay some attention to me. I can't mute. That's really cool. So there's another set, another pair, again, different drama. And then the last one we did here, let's kind of wrap it up with this guy. The last one we did was the Tower Bridges in London over the Thames River. Just an interesting, very good, quick learning process for me. And again, I will close with this, gentlemen. I thank you so much for the time. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving holiday. We'll probably touch base before the holidays. I'm going to try and get back more active here on Thursday. I might have a bit of a different schedule problem on Thursday. I hope not, but I'll put something on maybe Thursday, maybe do some Mercedes SUV stuff that I've been thinking about for some time. But I'll keep you posted. And again, thank you so much for joining forces with me today. It's just been a real joy to have you on board. And Captain Nemo, boy, I cannot thank you enough for the time spent. And we will get together on Discord to chat some things. You as well, Chip. And by the way, my last question: do you think I should have some prints made of these guys and go out for purchase or something? You think that's valid to look at? Just get your. I'll hold on for record your comment here. You think that's valid? Because I would like to add some more things to my website in terms of just being all product work, getting some fine art stuff. Not that this is fine art, but it's a different approach. Well, I'm waiting for that response. Yeah, sure, but I still miss the paper. Oh, yeah, you know what? I'm getting that taken care of, too. Nemo, I'm sorry. That's why I want to talk to you about that. So we're getting that organized, and we'll get that up and running for you very, very quickly here. So thank you for that reminder. And with the Thanksgiving and all the other stuff going, no excuses. I've just been excellent to get that done. It's in operation, and we'll get it clarified hopefully by the end of the week. Again, I so thank you so much for the time spent here today, gentlemen. And again, please visit my website, drcontrast.com. Any comment you might have, please pass along some information. If you have anything you want to add to, for example, and I really appreciate if you take a moment, just drop me an email at jim@drcontrast.com. It would be terrific to hear from you, especially if there are things, for example, like Captain Nemo and Chip you want to see me work on. Hey, Demetrius, how are you, man? Good to see you. Doctor, how are you? Thank you so much. Have you been there all the time? You're sneaky. How about that? You just snuck in now? Good deal. Yeah, good. That's outstanding. Did you have a good Thanksgiving, Demetrius? Oh, hey, thanks very much, Demetrius. Really appreciate the, I don't know if you caught the majority, I'm sure you caught the majority of the gist was trying to change gears and go into a watercolor approach and trying to make a fit between one or the other, from product design, the design stuff, so to speak, right into some fine art work, and what we learned from fine art right back into design work. So I thought we'd slow the pace down today and show you a little bit of a variation in theme. I don't know if you caught it or not, but each one of these watercolor studies, no more than 45 minutes to an hour. for the benefit of making sure it's spontaneous, not to muddy it up. And I'm still learning. Believe me, I still have a lot of miles to go before I get at it here. But good to have you on board. And to all of you, thank you so much. Visit me at drcontrast.com. Drop me a note, jim@drcontrast.com. And last but not least, I always say this because I sincerely mean it with all my heart. Never forget to dare to be great, because you are. Just always do that. Thank you so much. Have a great day. We'll hope to see you on Thursday, and I'll keep you posted. All the best. Thank you.